One, two, three, test. Good morning, everyone. Alexandra, if you are ready with...
Hello, Marta. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm good. I'm fine. If you can keep talking for a second, please. So I would
Of
like to check
course.
the sound.
Of course. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. This is a test. Good morning, everyone. How are you today in the beautiful Strasbourg? Here
Okay,
we
so
are even better.
for me, the sound is good in the room and
In the room?
interactio.
All
So
good?
great. And now we can start the language test.
Okay.
Okay, so we have today German, English, French, Italian, and Polish. I will play some music. Give me a second. Oi. Okay, so let's start with German. Yeah, English,
English 1, 2, 3. English is English good.
French. Okay, Italian. Good, and the last one is Polish. Give me a second. Okay. For me, it's okay. Okay, yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Alexandra, so you can put the message on the IT support chat that we
That's
are
it.
ready.
Ready. Perfect. Okay, Marta,
Perfect.
on
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
if you want me to call Jessica, Mrs. Stark, let me know. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you as well.
So we have to have the video in the room and in Interaction as well. At this moment, I have nothing. And you need to activate the sound as well. Okay, thank you. We are
So, yeah, good morning, everybody. I hope you are all doing fine. I see that we have already 41 people online and some in the room of our members and assistants. So I think it's good that we start, even though we have 1.5 hours. I think it's but a lot of speakers and a lot of very interesting presentations. So I think it's important that we start. Equines, meaning horses, but also donkeys, and their hybrids are versatile animals serving different purposes throughout their life and are often not adequately protected by the legislation in place because they don't fall within a single category. Today's presentations and discussions will enable us to understand how the upcoming legislative proposals on animal welfare can, among other opportunities, better address these loopholes that exist and ensure that all equines are adequately protected in the EU. So we are joined today by Sabrina Gurtner, Project Manager at the Animal Welfare Foundation, who will present the animal welfare concerns arising from the production and use of pregnant mare serum gonadotropin, PMSG, also called equine chorionic gonadotropin, ECG. This hormone is extracted from the blood of pregnant mares in terrible conditions, which are completely incompatible with minimum animal welfare standards. So in addition, the hormone is used on animals in intensive farming to synchronize estrus and thus increase production. Crazy world we live in. Another topic that will be discussed is working equids. In the EU, many equids are used in tourism, in agriculture, forestry, and waste management, among other sectors. So Dr. Joe Collins from the Donkey Sanctuary will introduce a new report detailing how these animals contribute to our livelihoods, emphasizing on the need to better protect them. Jessica Stark is also going to be with us, Director of Communications and Public Affairs at the World Horse Welfare, will join us online to give further indications for the inclusions of equines within the scope of the upcoming animal welfare legislation, especially with regards to keeping and transport. In particular, it will be essential to introduce species-specific provisions that can best ensure the welfare of these animals. Finally, we are going to have with us Christophe Marie from the Foundation Brigitte Bardot. He will shortly introduce footage taken at a horse fair in Mors in France, depicting the abuse and mistreatment of horses. So during this intergroup session, we will therefore learn more about the role of equines, about specific issues affecting their welfare and about solutions that can be implemented by the EU in the upcoming new animal welfare legislation. Before we begin, I will briefly highlight, as usual, some practical aspects for the running of this session. So as you know, the meeting is live streamed on Interaxio. The meeting will be recorded, the video recording and presentation will be, of course, uploaded to the Intergroup website afterwards. So, first presentation, I will now give the floor to Sabrina Gurtner, Project Manager at the Animal Welfare Foundation, who will present on the welfare concerns around the production and use of pregnant mare serum gonadotropin, PMSG. Dear Sabrina, the floor is yours. Thank you very much again for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this intergroup meeting. On behalf of the Animal Welfare Foundation, I would like to speak about the systematic problems and cruelty involved in the production and use of PMSG. We've been investigating since 2015, firstly in South America and later also in Iceland and Germany. I'd like to present our most important findings. Next slide, please. The abbreviation PMSG stands for pregnant mare serum gonadotropin. The hormone is also called ECG. It is extracted from the blood of mares during early pregnancy over a period of 2 to 3 months. The hormone is used to increase and control fertility of farmed animals, mainly pigs, but also cattle, sheep, and goats. It is only used in intensive farming. Actually, the systematic use of fertility hormones is prohibited in organic farming. In pig breeding, PMSG is mainly used to synchronize estrus, artificial insemination, and birth. Next. Here you can see the PMSG advertising of a pharmaceutical company. They promise more profit, more piglets, less non-productive days, and less work. It becomes clear that PMSG is used to boost fertility and efficiency in industrial farming. Next. It's important to mention that the use of PMSG has negative effects on the welfare of pigs. PMSG can be used to induce puberty in young sows, but this usually leads to a shorter productivity and early slaughter. Furthermore, the sows have no time to recover in between pregnancies, which can lead to severe health issues. PMSG also induces superovulation. It is common that more piglets are born than the sow can feed. Weak piglets are often not able to survive, or they are killed for economic reasons. Next. There are numerous alternatives available to control reproduction in pigs. On the one hand, there are hormone-free alternatives, so-called zootechnical measures. These include contact with male animals or with other females in heat, optimal nutrition and lighting, and exercise. On the other hand, there are synthetic alternatives already available on the European market. These are synthetic hormones which have a similar efficacy compared to PMSG. In Germany, for example, there are 36 synthetic alternatives available for different animal species, including 8 for pigs. Next. The production of PMSG also raises serious animal welfare concerns. The mares used for PMSG production in Argentina and Uruguay are semi-wild and not used to human handling. It's impossible to take blood from semi-wild horses without causing stress and fear or without using violence. We repeatedly documented the mares being severely mistreated. Up to 10 liters of blood are taken from the mares over a period of 11 weeks, once a week. And this high volume and frequency can lead to anemia, emaciation, a weakened immune system, and even death. We observed no veterinary care for injured or sick horses. About 30% of the mares drop out of the production every year. They either die on the pasture or they are sent to slaughter when they no longer get pregnant. The foals are an unwanted byproduct. That is why they are systematically aborted. The abortion around day 110 of pregnancy holds a high risk of complications and can be fatal for the mares. I would like to show you some extracts from our investigations. Several pharma companies in the EU stopped the import of PMSG from South America in 2017 and 18. Most of them switched to Iceland. The Argentinian platform Syntex, which you have seen in the video, lost all their European clients in 2018. Syntex is currently trying to return to the European market with their final product, Fixplan. Marketing authorization procedures for Fixplan are running in several EU member states. The product was first authorized in Ireland and later also in France, Spain, and Germany. Several applications are still pending. Next. In Iceland, 5 liters of blood are taken from the mares once a week. This is 15 to 20% of their total blood volume. International guidelines recommend a maximum extraction volume of 10 to 15% once a month, and these guidelines apply to non-pregnant horses. The mares in Iceland are both pregnant and lactating. Most of them are untamed and semi-wild, and brute force is used to take their blood. Repeated traumatization can lead to panic and resistance or to learned helplessness, which means that the mares give up struggling. The infrastructure on Icelandic platforms is inadequate, and the restraint boxes pose a high risk of injuries. The foals are just a byproduct of PMSG production, and they are usually slaughtered. Next. Next. PMSG production also takes place in the EU. Since the 18th, PMSG has been produced on a German stud farm where 4 liters of blood are taken from the mares once a week. This makes a total of 16 liters per week. The local competent authority has approved the procedure, even though German guidelines prohibit blood collection from pregnant and lactating mares for commercial purposes. Next. 2 legal opinions from Germany come to the conclusion that blood collection for PMSG production is classified as animal experiment. However, animal experiments must be indispensable and comply with the principle of the 3 Rs, which are replacement, reduction, refinement. Since PMSG could be replaced by alternative methods, its production is in breach of EU and national legislation. In October last year, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on the Farm to Fork strategy, which includes a point about PMSG. The resolution states that animal experiments that are not indispensable should have no place in the food chain, and it calls on the Commission and Member States to stop the import and domestic production of PMSG. To this day, the Commission still seems reluctant to impose a ban on PMSG. However, our investigations show that it's high time for the Commission to take action and follow the Parliament's call. Some Member States already support the Parliament's call, for example, Austria and the Netherlands. The Dutch Parliament recently adopted a motion calling for a European ban on PMSG import and production. Other Member States should follow this example. Next. Here you can see some ideas how you could help as a member of the European Parliament, together with your national party colleagues. You could ask the national government to support the Parliament's call on the European Commission and to put PMSG on the agenda of the European Council of Ministers. Or you could take action in the national parliaments, for example, submit a motion for a national ban on PMSG. Next. PMSG causes suffering not only for the mares on blood farms, but also for the animals exploited in industrial farming. We therefore call on the European Commission and on producing and importing countries to prohibit the production and import of PMSG and also its use. Such a ban could be included in the new regulation on animals kept for commercial purposes. The hormone PMSG is outdated. Boosting factory farming goes against the objectives of the European Green Deal and its Farm to Fork strategy, which aim to move towards a sustainable food system. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Sabrina Görtner, for this very informative presentation and also for all the research that you are doing on the ground. So it's very important to have, even though it's very cruel to watch it, but it's so important that we have those footage, that we show them around and that we fight against the production, but also the import of PMSG. So thank you very much again for your work. I go on the second presentation, give the floor to Dr. Joe Collins, Chief Veterinary Advisor from the Donkey Sanctuary, who will present a report on working equids in the European Union. Dr. Collins, the floor is yours. And thank you also for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was an interesting journey from Ireland, given the climatic conditions just at the moment. So my name is Joe Collins. I've been an equine veterinarian for 35 years now. I'm a graduate of the vet school in Dublin. And why am I presenting this, which I hope is somewhat more positive and a little bit lighter than Sabrina's presentation on a very important subject, is that I currently work for the Donkey Sanctuary. My PhD on equine welfare was supported by World Horse Welfare, and I chair, within Eurogroup for Animals, I chair the Equines working group. So I want to present to you a report that we've just published as a collaborative effort between these 3 organisations about working equids in the European Union. So This is about working animals that are very often relatively hidden. Their visibility is not sometimes enormous, but we feel that they're a very important element of supporting communities, and we feel that they're highlighting them, their position and their use is really, really valuable to us because it fits very nicely with sustainability agendas. So here you can see some elements of how they might be used, and I use use in the very positive sense of the term as work. We're all here at work today. Most of us work for a living, and these are animals that work with communities, support communities in their endeavours. So we have working equids in agriculture and horticultural aspects, where particularly in remote regions, mountainous areas, places where machinery finds it difficult to operate, particularly where machinery can have a very large footprint on land, we find that working equids have a much smaller footprint, and this is a very important element of sustainability. But not only in rural communities and rural environments, we also feel that equids have a very important role to play in urban spaces also. So you see some examples here. Agriculture, rural, but also urban. And then we have, of course, the tourism area where equids are of growing importance. So sustainability, if we just look at a couple of definitions of sustainability, it's really about trying to leave a legacy, a positive legacy to those who come after us. Very succinctly, it has been described as enough for all forever. And we humans have strived over very many years and generations for more and growth and growth. But perhaps we're coming close to a time where we have to say that maybe we have enough. And, you know, do we now have enough? And what risk do we have of leaving less for generations to come behind us? And this is very much close to the heart of sustainability. So working equids, health and welfare is really essential, not only to the equids, but also to those and communities who depend upon them, because the link between the health and welfare of those animals and the communities is very demonstrable. Now, when we look at working equids in communities, we have to look at their welfare, key components of their welfare. And so we examined through this report, and we've identified some places in which the welfare of equids needs highlighting and needs protecting. You look at this image, for example, of pack animals, and I think immediately of the size, the shape, the body condition score of the animals. I think and look at the loads that these animals are being asked to carry or perhaps draw if they were pulling a carriage. I look at the terrain. I look at the slope that they may be asked to climb, either up or actually also down, because descending a slope is also sometimes quite a challenge for equids, depending on the load, the distribution of the load, etc. And I also think very much about the environment. I think about the temperature, I think about the humidity, I think about the working conditions, I think about the rest periods, I think about noise, I think about pollution in urban environments. These are all as important to sentient animals like equines as they are to ourselves, to the people, to the communities who work with them. So the next image again just shows some examples of where equids might live and work. And the next presentation after mine, which I think links very nicely with this, is to think about kept animals. It might in short be called the Kept Animals Regulation, but it's the welfare of animals kept for economic purposes. That's the regulation that's being proposed to replace a directive on the welfare of animals kept for farming purposes. So we must think very carefully about this definition of economic purposes. And from the point of perspective of equines, we must think, what equines fit into that definition? What is within scope of that proposed new regulation? These equids that we're talking about here as working equids, I think very firmly fit within that definition because they are kept for economic purposes in tourism, in agriculture, in transport, in urban environments, etc. But currently, under the current directive, we find that many equids fall within the gaps. There are many horses, donkeys and mules that fall in and out of different categories as they go through their lifetime. They may have been bred for economic purposes as part of some, as I said, an economic or commercial enterprise, perhaps as sport horses or race horses. But those same horses will move in and out of various categories over the period of their lifetime. They may become leisure animals. They may become working animals. They may become sporting animals. They may, in fact, ultimately be meat production animals, as equids are food producing in EU legislation. And so we currently have a situation where equids may, for various periods of their time, be within the scope and otherwise outside the scope. So the current directive, for example, on the welfare of animals kept for farming purposes, specifically excludes equids when kept or used for sporting purposes. And the presentation after this is going to expand upon this talk, and I hope we're going to have some conversation around how that new regulation might develop. Next, please. So what do we have as recommendations? Really around working equids, we need to highlight their presence. We need people to be better aware of their existence. As I said, they're often invisible or relatively invisible. But their relevance is that they fit very, very nicely with sustainable development. You think of the UN SDGs, which aren't explicit in any way in regard to animals and animal welfare, but we increasingly recognise the value of equids and other working animals in communities in sustaining livelihoods. But these animals deserve their standards for their own sake also. These are sentient animals that deserve protection, and we must identify, having highlighted their existence and their value to communities, we must then identify how best their welfare can be protected within those roles. Next, please. And so the last few recommendations here really are around including animal welfare criteria, not only in legislative provisions, as I've mentioned about the kept animals regulation, but also really, standards follow the money. If we can support communities through common agricultural policy and schemes, then we are delivering real benefits to animal welfare. Yes, we're delivering monies to the communities who keep these animals, but inherent in the delivery of those monies should be standards that protect the animals and that protect natural resources and the environment. Sustainable forestry, for example, the Green Deal, Sabrina has already mentioned that. And I think we have real opportunities here through the delivery of funds to support communities, but also to improve animal welfare standards within the EU. Next, please. So finally, I've mentioned the kept animals regulation, and we need to, in the proposals for this regulation, we need to enshrine broad minimum standards for equines, including work at equids within the EU. But thereafter, we all recognise that it's about enforcement. We must have the will and the means to enforce standards. And there are some ideas here about how such standards might be enforced. Licensing, for example, in some communities, in urban communities where working equids are involved in tourism. We already have in some cities, we have licensing standards in operation. But of course, then you have to back up your standards with inspections and then with penalties in cases where there are egregious failure to maintain standards. But I think really, to end on a very positive note here, we want to identify that these equids exist in communities, in urban communities, rural communities. We want to highlight their great value to communities in sustaining livelihoods. We want to emphasize how they have a small footprint and deliver, therefore, large pluses or positives for that effect, and how we can then support communities who have working equids at the heart of partnerships. And finally, thank you very much. I want to acknowledge the great work of these three organisations in coming together to highlight this. We have Your Group for Animals, of which both the Donkey Sanctuary and World Horse Welfare are members. And I recommend the report. We'd be delighted to supply physical copies or electronic copies of the report to anybody who would be interested in receiving them. And you have here on this slide the 3 contact details for the 3 organisations. And thank you very much again to you, Tilly, for hosting this meeting and giving us the opportunity to present on these really important equine topics. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Joy Collins, and also for presenting here your key elements of this report. And I must think that remembers me the time when I was mayor of a rural municipality where we introduced the horse again into the forest as a project, and because of this low ecological impact that they have. So very interesting, and I think it's indeed a topic we forget about, all those working equids. And when they get old, I think it's also important then to allow the horses to retire, and I think that's where you have this sanctuary for the donkeys. You mentioned them already. Let's go to the now to the World Horse Welfare. I will give the floor to Jessica Stark. So she is Director of Communication and Public Affairs from the World Horse Welfare, and she will raise other concerns relevant to the revision of the EU animal welfare legislation. Mrs. Stark, the floor is yours.
Morning, and I wish that I were with you in person. Unfortunately, the train companies in Britain did not agree with that, but I'm delighted to join you here today. As Joe had mentioned, I'm going to be briefly reviewing the real opportunity that the European Commission's review of animal welfare legislation has for equines, and why we need to take advantage of this opportunity and how we can do that. Next slide, please. I'm going to briefly cover why this is important for equines in the review, and specifically focus on the opportunity regarding kept animals, as Joe mentioned briefly, during transport, and also very briefly slaughter and labeling. Next slide, please. Quickly, a little bit about World Horse Welfare, just to underline that we are an international organization that just happens to be based in the UK, but we were founded to help influence EU policy on equines. Horses are truly global. We're very active in EU policy. We also work very closely with many groups and organizations, including Intergroup for Animals. But we also engage with the world of horse sport, as well as the wider equine sector and equine industry. And we're delighted to have a fund to help the equines and their keepers in Ukraine. Next slide, please. Equines. They really should be at the center of this review, because the opportunities to truly protect them are available for the first time in possibly a generation. As Joe mentioned, equines fulfill many different roles for people. Possibly no other animal fulfills so many roles in society, and they tend to fall through the cracks of legislation throughout their lives, or even if they perform just one role. They're kind of an awkward species. They're not quite like livestock, and they're not quite like pets, but they are used for both of those purposes and many more. We really want to take this opportunity provided by the review to give them the protection they deserve. One of the reasons equines are so different is that they've had a very close bond in society with human beings. They can be considered as family members. They're absolutely fundamental to people's livelihoods, as Joe mentioned. And also their industry is developed around them, including in sport. However, the legislation does not reflect how important these animals are and the various ways that they can be truly vulnerable. I'd like to draw your attention in particular to the issue of traceability. You can have lots of very good legislation, but unless it can be enforced, that legislation is worthless. And what we find very often is, since horses are not traced, the traceability system is not fit for purpose. These equines can be lost, and as we've seen recently in Spain, once again, the challenge of many of these horses ending up as horse meat when they should not be in the food chain. It comes up because where there is lack of traceability, there is profit to be made in the fraudulent trade in horses. Next slide, please. So this is why we think that equines kept for economic purposes should be very much a key part of the review of the current legislation, which only covers animals on farm. We think that this is a great opportunity to lay a foundation for equine-specific rules in the future, which are desperately needed. And we really need greater clarity and harmonization across the member states. We find that many different countries, they view horses differently. In some countries they're seen more as farm animals, in others they fall under companion animal legislation. We need something that encapsulates all of these uses of equines. So we would like to see the legislation enlarge in scope. We also think that the legislation must consider the latest scientific evidence, particularly around equine cognition and species-specific behavior and needs. We're learning more all the time about the intelligence of horses, how they learn, how they behave, and also how they need certain fundamentals in their lives that too often they are denied in an economic sphere. So, for instance, we would want to see the legislation include the 5 domains. In the past, the 5 freedoms were considered a basis for good animal welfare. That thinking has moved on in the past couple of decades to the 5 domains, which includes not only protecting horses from negative experiences like pain or fear or starvation or disease, but also provides them with positive experiences. And anybody who has a pet will know that. We want to give our pets a good, happy life. And that's what the 5 domains are all about. It's about giving animals an opportunity to have positive experiences, experience positive emotions, and not only just try to minimize negative. We also would want to see in the legislation an acknowledgement of a horse's need for social interaction. Very often, practices in the past have seen horses kept in a stable alone for up to 23 hours a day or more. Perhaps they're kept alone in a field. Perhaps they can't touch their mates or smell their herd mates. And horses have evolved as herd animals. They need to be in a herd, or that causes a significant amount of stress that can lead to negative behaviors, aggression, and overall poor mental well-being. And one of the key parts, of course, of the 5 domains is that all the positive aspects of good horse care and providing positive experiences will provide them with positive mental state. So that ability to interact socially, if and when the horse chooses, is really important. And also, led by the evidence, we need to look at and recognize the evidence of how horses learn. You saw some practices in Sabrina's film, which relied on persuading horses to do things based on pain and fear. Hitting a horse with a stick, causing fear in them to behave in a certain way. We don't need to do this. The science is there that shows us that horses do respond well to positive reinforcement and techniques under operant conditioning, where it can be very straightforward to train a horse and to get the types of behavior that you want without using violent measures. But even too often, very experienced horse people and a lot of traditional horse practices still rely on the old ways of thinking. And we think that the EU can look forward to the more well-received thinking at the moment. And then finally, training. I mean, this goes to education again, not just of people who engage with horses and understanding how horses learn and horse behavior, but we need training of people who handle the animals. What we see in certainly in the transport of horses and in the keeping of horses in every country of the EU and around the world, indeed, it's that lack of education which poses the greatest welfare risk. It's ignorance of what horses need, how to fulfill their needs, or ignorance of how horses are of their own behavior. And we would like to see much better competence and training, not just of the people who transport them, but people at control posts and transport, for instance. Even the veterinarians may not have a specialism in equines, but if they are assessing them, they need that training to understand what is appropriate health and behavior and what is not. So the on-farm legislation should definitely be expanded to include all equines, because they are all existing within economic purposes to some degree. We need a real focus in the legislation on the 5 domains and fulfilling animals' needs for positive experiences as well as minimizing negative experiences. And we need a real focus on what the evidence tells us horses need from how they have evolved throughout the millennia. Thank you. Next slide. And then there's transport, welfare and transport. This is a significant opportunity, and horses may not be the most numerous in number transported for slaughter. They are the most numerous number transported for a variety of purposes. So horses are transported for many purposes other than for slaughter. But in many ways, we think that the hugest opportunity with the review of the welfare and transport legislation is to really improve the conditions and the laws governing welfare and transport to slaughter, because currently the laws are not fit for purpose. They're unenforceable and they don't truly protect horse welfare as they are written. We think the main areas to address is we need a short, finite journey limit on all horses transported within the EU for slaughter. We also believe that the distinction between registered horses, that is horses registered with a stud book, they may be a particular breed, they may be part of a particular, a past competition horse, or once they were racehorse, versus horses that have none of that kind of particular registration according to breed. That distinction needs to go. It has nothing to do with welfare. Horses can drop in and out of a high welfare status to a low welfare status, whether they're registered or not, and we think this distinction is unhelpful. We also, again, believe that there should be much greater focus on training for all personnel involved with the horses that are transported for slaughter, but also for any context. There's now scientific evidence as well regarding space allowance that we need to update the legislation in line with, just as there is on journey times. And we also need to consider the reasonable temperatures in the vehicles, recognizing that some of these can be mitigated for horses. We also would like to see much more specific provisions on rest stops, on watering, provision of food, and clearly there's more to do on sea transport, as well as other factors such as vehicle design. Thank you. Next slide. And then I'll briefly just run on slaughter and welfare labeling. Again, this is part of the review. Slaughter, we would just emphasize that there's going to be more evidence to help inform this legislation. World Horse Welfare has actually commissioned research into equine welfare at slaughter. But one thing I would say we do need in the EU is we need a list of equine registered slaughterhouses, because that picture changes and that can have a real impact on the distances horses are traveled to, and we need to think about that more strategically. And then on labeling, we really want equines included in the animal welfare labeling discussions. They need to be a key part of it, and we're looking forward with Intergroup and taking part in those discussions. And I would just say again that country of origin labeling, no matter what is or is not included in the animal welfare labeling, we need country of origin labeling for equine meat. The only labeling required now is the country of slaughter, which can be very misleading, and it does not reflect the distances transported or where those horses lived. And given the horse meat scandal and also consumer information, we found it makes a difference to people if they know their meat is local or if it's not. So we really need country of origin labeling for horses. And that is true for welfare, it's true for food safety, and it's essential for food traceability. Next slide, please. So what can MEPs do? We really want your support to ensure this review carries on in the new political term. We know that there is not much time left for the proposals. We really need this continue. This is an excellent piece of work and it is hugely popular. So we really want to work with you to continue on it. We very much want you to include push for the inclusion of equine-specific provisions into this review that take account of their needs as evidenced by science. And also, we understand we want clear, practical rules to make the framework fit for purpose. As we said, you can have lots of great laws, but unless they're enforced, which means unless they're enforceable, they won't really make the impact we want. So we want to work to devise something practical, but we want to make the most of this incredible opportunity for the first time in a generation to really protect equines in the EU. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Ms. Jessica Stark. It was very interesting listening to you because it's important to have all this in mind when we are going to work indeed on the revision of the legislation regarding animal welfare. So it was good to have your very complete presentation on that. So right now we are going to have a short intervention with footage of horse ill treatments at the fair in Mors in France, in the Cantal. And I will pass for that the floor to Christophe Marie. He is Associate Director at the Fondation Brigitte Bardot, who will show us footage about really act of violence against horses at this famous horse fair in the Cantal. He will then briefly also comment about it. So this is our last presentation. Good morning, Christophe.
Bonjour.
Good morning. So do you want me to comment on the images or give you an introduction? These images were shot on the 27th of October this year. This is a horse fair that takes place in Mors, and the horses are then afterwards sent to Italy to be slaughtered or sent to Spain to be fattened up and then brought back to France to be slaughtered. I don't know whether you perhaps want to show the video first, or I can talk at the same time as we watch the video. Yes, we can do that, can we?
Pardon? Est-ce qu'il y a du son avec
Un
les...
petit peu, mais
Is there any sound with the video? There's a little, but I can talk over that, or perhaps I can speak at the end and conclude.
Et on va peut-être essayer comme ça, peut-être
Ok.
alors on vous entendra mieux par après.
Perhaps we'll wait then to hear from you and we'll watch the videos first. Thank you, Christophe.
Il n'y a pas de contrôle systématique de tous les animaux.
Ouais, il voit les vétos quand il arrive, les chevaux.
Où ici, ouais. Non. Non. Non, non. Et ils voyaient pas le veto du tout.
Et c'est toujours pour la viande ou...
La viande, la viande ou après l'élevage aussi. Hein. Après, quand ils sont vendus au marchand de Sion, et c'est pas toujours à destination guidon.
Donc, comme je vous le disais tout à l'heure, effectivement, c'est...
As I was saying earlier, was a video shot on the 27th of October this year, and these are then horses which are sent to Italy to be slaughtered. As you can see, there's a lot of violent treatment of the horses, and one of the people working there said that this was completely normal. It's something that's an everyday occurrence and considered completely usual. There weren't any veterinary checks being carried out. There were vets there, but they weren't able to carry out all the checks. And they were just responsible then for checking the loading of the horses and how many were being transported, rather than being able to actually carry out checks on the animals themselves. We have some accounts from veterinarians who were there who said that some of these animals should not have been transported because they were injured. This is the kind of dramatic situation that we've seen in other places this morning, in Argentina and in Uruguay, where horses are being injured, and we would like the European Union to take action, but we'd also like the European Union to take action and contact the French authorities about this to find out what is happening in these horse fairs. We can't have a situation where the Ministry of Agriculture doesn't respond or doesn't do anything about this when people are treating animals in this way. That's why we would like some action to be taken and for the Ministry of Agriculture to have to answer on this point. There are these particular cases, and we'd also like there to be much stricter European rules on transporting and slaughtering these animals, and also make sure that the proper checks are being carried out. Thank you very much, Christophe Marie, for your work. I think these images always make a real impression and show us exactly what is happening. And these were very recent images, just a couple of months ago.
Open the floor for questions and remarks regarding the people here, but also the people connected online if they want to join. And I have the first was Manuela Ripa, who wants to take the floor. And then I have Michel and Francisco. Yeah, don't hesitate, please.
Thank you very much, Tilly, and I would be very happy to sign such a letter to the French minister, because what you just showed us shows the abyss of human mankind, to see violence against animals as normal, and it always leaves me speechless, really. I would have a question regarding Mrs. Stark, especially regarding animals, horses used for sports, because for me there is no animal well-being in show jumping and other categories that they use the animals for sport, but of course horse riders see it completely different, and they're always telling me that the animal is loving what he's doing, and that they would never force the animal to do things they wouldn't do. So just give me a hint about how much is animal welfare still there, or how much are these animals suffering doing this show jumping, for example, so that I have some clarity next time when I speak to the horse riders. And I would like to ask Mrs. Gurtner some questions, because I'm also in the Intercommittee of the European Parliament, so I always like to see the global implications of what we're doing at European level. So I would like to understand if it would be enough to ban the use of ECG in the EU to ensure that there are no more imports or production in the European Union. So what would it mean if we ban it at European level? I mean, what are the implications for imports? And is it possible, if we don't ban the imports or the production and use of ECG in the EU, to enact provisions that would guarantee the welfare of mares used for the ECG production? Thank you very much.
I think I will let answering that we do directly so first I will give the floor maybe to Mrs. Stark for the first question on the horses in sport.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very pertinent question. Across horse sport, welfare can be very good. I know exactly what you mean when people say, but my horse really enjoys it. And many people will say, well, you can't force a horse to do something like that. And there's a bit of truth in it. But what I would say is that the welfare in sport can be very good. And there's lots of good practices out there, but it's a mixed picture. And I think horse sport is alive itself to the idea that they too need to change in line with scientific thinking. Horse sport, especially at international level, is regulated by the FEI, so that is self-regulated very much as racing is regulated, and then you have national federations. But there are lots of levels in between that, and just as with pets, we can't say every dog that's kept as a pet is kept very well. But in general, the welfare of horses is very highly prioritized because it can be linked to performance. But our view at World Horse Welfare is that welfare can always be improved, and even practices and ways of keeping or training horses or competing them needs to look at the latest evidence on what good welfare is. So I would certainly say that there can be very good welfare in sport. These horses can have very good lives, but it's up to the sports to ensure that that is the kind of lives that they are giving these horses. And in our view, that's from birth to death. That's not just in training or in competition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will give also maybe the floor to Dr. Joey Collins. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, it's a really interesting question, and I don't speak here as the Chief Veterinary Advisor of the Donkey Sanctuary, who you can imagine are not directly involved in equestrian sport, but I am also an equine veterinarian, official veterinarian in FEI competition. So your question is really, really interesting, and whenever I watch horse racing, and in my country in Ireland there's a lot of horse racing and national hunt racing at the moment, and I see a rider fall off, and then I'm really, really interested to see what do those horses then do. Now, some of those horses follow on with the group and they continue to go around the course and they continue to jump fences. And I hear some commentators saying, oh, well, that proves that the horse enjoys jumping fences. Now, to me, with whatever level of knowledge I have of horse behaviour and needs, I think that what those horses are demonstrating is their desire to be still part of the group. So if you watch them then go round the course and you see a rail intervene, and if that horse gets separated from the rest of the group by a rail, you find I'm really fascinated to watch what happens with those loose horses. And some of those horses will actually try to run through a rail or even jump the rail to get back with the rest of the group. But it also, it seems to me, as someone who has ridden quite a lot in my younger times and jumped some of these fences, I'm acknowledging openly, to ride a horse that there are some times when you ride a horse and face towards an obstacle where I have to honestly say the horse has wanted to jump it when I haven't, because I've been scared, witless, but actually the horse sees the event, and if there's an enormous pleasure in riding such a horse when they seem to willingly want to go and do something, and you as a rider say to yourself, wow, this is quite incredible. But the opposite, and I do know where your question comes from, it is terrible to see, and we've seen some awful footage here today, it is terrible to see people making horses do things, using goads or electric devices or sticks, and we have far too much of that still in all of our countries, I'm sure. And I have to say, against my own gender, it is all, I know that the footage was a tiny image of one woman, but it is almost always middle-aged men. I regret greatly to have to say this publicly, and I've seen this. I've been at many, many of these fairs as part of my own PhD. I did 30 visits to horse fairs, similar to what our French friends have just shown. And it is depressing, really depressing to see so many people engage in this activity with animals where they hit them, they prod them, they goad them, and they set a terrible example, particularly for younger people in these, the public events. So I do understand where your question is coming from. Like Jessica says, I don't think it's very simple. I think there are many instances where there's really good welfare. I think there are many instances where the horses, as best as we're able to judge it, do genuinely seem to enjoy the activity, to be engaged in it, and to have the communication and a partnership with a human being. I think there are many instances where horses enjoy, and I know this is a personal perspective, enjoy that relationship, and they give to that relationship freely, and I think that is wonderful. But I think what is terrible is when we see examples of the converse. And we must be firm, and we must be open and condemning those activities when we see them for what they are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the other questions, I will give the floor to Sabrina Göttner, please, on the ECG issues.
Thank you very much for your questions. I believe it's not enough to just ban the use of PMSG in Europe, to also stop the production and import of the hormone, because actually there is a high worldwide demand for PMSG. And it cannot be excluded that there would still be production within the EU that would supply the foreign markets. As we know, factory farming is increasing, for example, in China. So it could not be excluded that a Chinese pharma company would buy PMSG produced in the EU. And also, on the other hand, even now in Europe, there are big pharma companies that produce the final product within the EU, like, for example, Siva Santé Animal, based in France, or MSD, they have a production in Germany. They produce that here, the final product, and export it to the rest of the world, to many non-EU countries. So they could continue to import PMSG from Iceland or from South America or from these countries where we have investigated, to produce the final product and re-export it outside of the EU. So there would be no guarantee to stop production and import, and this is why it's very important to ban all three: import, production, and use of PMSG, to end this issue in Europe. To your second question, I don't believe that the welfare of the mares used in PMSG production could ever be guaranteed. And this because of systematical animal welfare problems involved in this production. First of all, the mares have to be pregnant, and the hormone is in their blood only during a very short time frame, during 2 or 3 months. So during this short time, as much blood as possible is extracted from the mares. This is one of the problems. Then the other problem is the foals. The foals are just an unwanted byproduct. So even if they are not aborted, what is going to happen to all these foals? And the third problem, systematic problem I see, is that a large number of mares are used for the production to make it profitable. And it's almost impossible to tame and train them all so that their blood could be taken without causing stress and without using violence. Or as it's done in Germany, for example, they use less mares. They only use 100 in the blood farm. But there they take much higher amounts of blood from each mare. In Germany, they take 16 liters per week compared to 5 liters in Iceland and 10 liters in South America. So due to all of these reasons, I believe that it's not possible to make this production animal friendly.
Thank you very much. And as you said at the very beginning, it's only also used in the intensive farming, but which is the largest farming that we have right now in Europe. So it's really also with all the ECI that we have on and the cage-eggs, etc., we have to stop intensive farming also. And even you spoke also about alternatives. So it's really difficult to understand why it is still produced, exported, etc. But maybe also the veterinary likes to say something on this topic, please.
So I will, and again, I'll preface my remarks by saying I'm not speaking on behalf of the donkey sanctuary here. You cannot imagine they're not invested in this subject. So I am an equine veterinarian by profession, and I've practiced in clinical practice for a long number of years. And we have a variety of hormones that we use in fertility management. Now, I understand I haven't worked in the intensive pig industry. That's not where I have worked. That's not my experience. It's in the equine industry. And we use some of these hormones, including similar ones, estrogens, progesterones, prostaglandins, PMSG, ECG, human chorionic gonadotropin. We use these in animal breeding and fertility and production management. Now, I do understand that in itself can cause, some concern. But veterinarians have an armory of hormonal products that they use for these purposes. And I used to work in the veterinary pharmaceutical industry for a period of time, and I understand greatly about the origins of these products and how they can be produced. Technologies have moved to a position where many of these natural hormones, I think of estrogen, progesterone, for example, many of which are used in humans, by the way, fertility control as much as they are in animals. But many of these are now synthetically produced as estrogens and progestogens. And so we have the ability to produce many of these without using animal models. And Sabrina has referenced that. I mean, in my own donkey sanctuary world, we have a huge problem with a traditional Chinese medicine called a jiao, which is produced from boiling donkey skins. And I know that's not the subject for today, but we identified that such products can be produced synthetically in laboratories. We have the technology. So for goodness sakes, why can we not, as an industry, as a people, move down that line? Now, that's separate to, and I understand Sabrina has referenced, there are concerns around the intensive pig production area and how these hormones are then used. And I think that's a somewhat separate argument than what we're speaking about here. But there is no defence I can see from a veterinary perspective about the use of mares in the production of these hormones. Somebody who has done a lot of fertility work with mares in my earlier career, the placenta of the mare is such that this hormone is only produced naturally in early pregnancy. And veterinarians can, and I understand there's some ethical issues here, but veterinarians can relatively easily abort very early pregnancies in mares. I'm talking about in the first week or two of pregnancy. That's relatively straightforward. I understand there's some ethical issues here, but that's relatively straightforward, how might I say it, without harming the mare. However, after that point, within the early pregnancy, when this hormone is being produced from the placenta, what is then a much more difficult and much inhumane practice is the abortion of those pregnancies then in mares at the stage of something like 100 or 120 days of pregnancy, up to 130 days of pregnancy. So at that stage of pregnancy in a mare, number one, is it biologically more difficult to terminate those pregnancies, but the practices that are then used to terminate that pregnancy are inhumane, distressing and harmful to mares. And I think that that's then the situation that we're in here, Sabrina, is that those mares her pregnancies are being aborted at that stage so that then they can be impregnated again, so that they then can return to this cycle of being an early pregnancy, so that they have an early placenta or a young placenta, and that's the phase in which this hormone is then being produced. And so that's what Sabrina is rightly highlighting here, and I'm absolutely supportive of her position in this regard. I think she does also reference that even if we in the EU somehow adjust or a ban or something around this, there is a worldwide industry here, and I'm sure Sabrina recognises that the existence of these farms, particularly in South America, won't necessarily be changed if the EU bans the import of the product. I'm not sure what percentage of the market share of the product is used in the EU versus the rest of the world. Do we know that?
There are not many statistics available on this, but as far as I know, both from Iceland, but also from South America, the largest part goes to the EU at the moment.
And then, I don't know this information, but then that's very, important, I think, from the perspective of the EU. How big is the EU's market share for this production of this? But I think, and Sabrina will have some knowledge about this, we have synthetic alternatives, and so this is a trade and a production that isn't necessary from the point of view of production of the product. Is that correct?
Exactly, and due to these alternatives which are available, the legal experts come to the conclusion that it's in breach of EU legislation, in breach of the directive on the protection of animals used for scientific purposes, which is based on the 3 Rs. So there is no justification for this production.
I mean, the ultimate goal should be really stop intensive farming. But right now, if we would be already coherent in the EU legislation and apply the 3 Rs as there are alternatives, that would be a very important first step. I will give the floor to Michal Wysik. He asked also for the floor. Michal.
I'm very benevolent to the pronunciation of my name, actually, so don't worry about mispronounce it. You have done it wrong, but it's really the normal way. I don't care about that too much. Thank you very much for all of our speakers for their presentations. It's always hard to attend these meetings because of the footages that we see, and we know that they are there, but still to see it on our own eyes is always quite a difficult practice. Nevertheless, I actually very much like the term that you actually used about these men beating those horses at the fair, of being sort of a middle-aged man. This was not a reference to their age, actually, but to their mindset, I would say. It was meant like this. And I like it very much, because, I don't think that this is a normal, nowadays, human should be able of such mistreatment of animals, and even considering something normal and traditional. Because I have been around these issues for so many times, and there's always this response that, why are you criticizing us? We love our animals. We wouldn't do anything wrong to them, and it has been done like this for centuries already. So why are you criticizing our culture, our traditions, and all that stuff? And it's not only those men in the fairs, but you would find many of our colleagues in this parliament to think the same way. And we always meet this really strong resistance toward any change in the agriculture. And we have seen this during the ANIT committee, and what we try to achieve just to put into report for the mistreatment of animals during live animal transports, how many of our colleagues actually opposed us, and how our ambitions have been washed down at the end, so the report was not that effective as it should been. So again, if we are trying to correct this sick treatment of animals, being it the extraction of the PMSG or whatever optimization of the conditions in the fairs, it's always a big struggle. Always, it's not an easy one, you know. So yeah, but we are really like predestined to do it. So I'm pretty much sure that it's okay that we have seen this, and we will do our best to raise the attention around that, or whatever can be done. We will try. I originally had a question on the PMSG, but it has been responded already very thoroughly. So just maybe one note. The problem is not only that we are exceeding the volume of blood that is being extracted, but the problem is really complex, and you have stressed that very well. So there's no way how to do it properly. It's actually sick in its very essence, and it should be aborted in that regard. So thank you very much for that. I have rather an ecological question, because we haven't touched upon the horse like from the ecological perspective. And from the ecological perspective, really, horse and all the equines are a unique functional group of grazers or even browsers that has really a crucial role in the maintaining of grassland ecosystems and habitats and all that stuff. And in that regard, horses really have to play a very significant role in the restoration of grasslands, you know, but we still tend to perceive them as a cultural animal. Actually, when they originated from a wild animal that was once widespread around the globe and in the Eurasia as well. So I would maybe like to listen to some of your thoughts about the ambition to actually use the horse in this restoration and rewilding processes, and maybe also in the term that if we should not move a little bit forward and perceive a horse as, again, a wild animal in the European landscape, whether this you perceive as a good idea or there are some constraints, whatever might come to your mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michel, and sorry again for mistreating your name. I will give also the floor to Francisco, and then we finish with the answers of our experts today.
Can you say my last name? Pronounce my last name.
Guerreiro.
Yeah, it was really good.
Portuguese is easier.
It's easier than yours. Sorry for not being here on the beginning of the meeting. I could not attend, so I'm not sure if I'm making a question that was already replied in the presentations. But regarding PMSG, I have a question that in some countries it's illegal to abort animals after doing this procedure, but some are not, if I have the correct information. And those that are not, there's a direct correlation between if you remove this type of liquid in the pregnancy, if there's an abortion afterwards. Is there any correlation, or there's no data on that? Do we know anything of this? Because for me, it's relevant to understand if after this type of procedure, the horses, the female horses, can make the pregnancy continue if they continue, or if directly or indirectly they have an abortion, a natural order. Is there any correlation to this, or no?
Well, I don't know about Europe.
Sorry, I want just to give the floor to the last question, and then you can react. We finish, because we only have 5 minutes, and I really wanted also to give the floor to the assistant of Annika Brunner, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Mesdames et
Thank you, Chair. Honourable members, I'm taking the floor on her behalf. Unfortunately, she's not able to be here today. It would be very useful to have some more information about the question that Madame Brun then sent in December, and then we received a reply in February. We've heard about the desire to ban the import and use of the pregnancy hormone, but we would also like to know whether the European Commission has kept a list of the farms using these hormones. The Commission has said that it perhaps indicates mistreatment of animals, so it doesn't seem completely convinced, and has also said that it has drafts in place, in draft documents regarding the ban of this hormone, but this is from February. Then the Commission said that it would like to improve the treatment of mares, but not within a legislative framework. But as I've said, the Commission is not keeping a list of the farms using this product, and it doesn't know whether they are receiving CAP funding. Madame Brunner wanted to point out that the Commission knows that this is happening, but is not trying to do anything to ban the production of this serum or its use. Then we'd like to know whether it would be a good idea to send a letter to the Commission on behalf of the whole Intergroup.
Words I will give to our experts, those who want to intervene. Maybe we start with you, Sabrina. If it's okay for you, then you could. Thank you.
Regarding the abortions of mares, I don't know within the EU if it is prohibited, but actually in PMSG production, as far as we know, it only takes place in Argentina and Uruguay, that the foals are systematically aborted. In Iceland, they are slaughtered when they are still very young, a few months old, up to 6 months old. And in Germany, they are not slaughtered. They are usually kept as riding horses, but we are not very sure where they end up in the end. But in Germany, it's a very small production with only 100 mares compared to the very big productions in Iceland and South America. And in South America, it is not illegal to abort the foals. So there is not even a legislation which would prescribe how the abortion has to be done. In Uruguay, it's done manually without painkillers, and this can be very painful for the mares. And it often also leads to the death of the mares. We have found dead mares that died on the pasture during the abortion. In Argentina, it's done medicinally, but also there we are not sure if they give painkillers or not, but also if you do it medicinally at this late stage, like day 110 until day 100, 130, there is still a high risk of complications. There is always a very high risk of complications, no matter if you do it manually or medicinally. So this regarding the abortions. Then regarding the other comments, actually in the EU, the use of PMSG in farmed animals does not have to be reported. So there are no official numbers on how much PMSG is used actually in industrial farming. As long as this is not reported, the EU Commission will not know if, for example, establishments that receive subsidies do use PMSG. There is no means to know that. Actually, as I said, there are no statistics on the use of PMSG, but there are in Germany, there are numbers on the sales of PMSG. And regarding these numbers, we can see that it is used systematically. I just have in my mind the numbers from 2019. These were the last published numbers. In that year, there were 1.7 million of breeding pigs. And in the same year, 2.1 million of PMSG doses were administered. So we can clearly see that it's used systematically.
Thank you very much. I see that you have, Jessica, start for the very last minutes that are left. If we have some 3-4 minutes left by the interpreters, that will be very nice, as we started a little bit late. Jessica Stark, is that a raised hand? Do you want? No, it disappeared. Maybe last word if you want to add something, and then we will need to finish. No, there she is. Jessica Stark, you want to add something on the question?
Yes,
please.
I did. I wanted to address the question regarding grazing, as I thought it was a very good point, and that the horse industry uses around 2.6 million hectares of land in the EU, and that is probably a conservative estimate. And horses and ponies are indeed very popular for conservation grazing and for managing grasslands. There are many benefits of mixed grazing. And there's also been a trend toward rewilding. And I think that this has many positives, but from a welfare perspective, I think we need to remember that all horses that exist are actually, they've been domesticated. There are no truly wild breeds left. They've all been domesticated. And we need to think as a society, you know, in our view, we are still managing those animals. If you're placing them on land for a purpose, you are managing those animals. And society needs to determine how much suffering they would allow. We've seen situations of rewilding where the animals cannot migrate, and then they overpopulate, and then they starve to death. And that we think is ethically not the right way to do things. But we do agree that horses can play a big role in a sustainable Europe and in managing grasslands, but we still need to think about our responsibility to them because they are not truly wild animals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last few minutes or seconds.
Very brief questions. The question of pharmaceutical use is a really, really interesting one. As you know, the new 6th of 2019, the Veterinary Medicines Regulation has introduced a requirement for the monitoring of the use of antimicrobials in animals, and that's specified so that each member state will in the coming years, have to produce data around the use of antimicrobial products, including the species in which they're used. And so that's a very interesting first step down that route. Now, that's in the public interest, public health. Antimicrobial resistance, as we know, is an issue that concerns human health as much as it does animal health. But it would be then interesting to see over the coming years whether that requirement might be extended to the requirement to produce data on the use of other categories of veterinary medicinal products in animals. I don't know. I'm just raising that as a potential interesting feature that might occur in years to come, if an argument were to be made that there was a public interest in having such data, as we do for antimicrobials. Then in terms of grazing and ecological use, it's really, really interesting. Just thinking again about medicines, we have a growing problem not only with antimicrobial resistance, but also with antiparasitic drug resistance. And one of the important ways in which we might begin to counter that problem is to use natural methods around grazing and mixed animal species grazing, because some of the internal parasites of horses are not as they are for ruminant species, and so there's a very interesting piece of work there around how best to employ, as it were, different animal species in grazing patterns that would then reduce our dependence on using chemical agents, for example, for for parasite control. So I think that's a really interesting, area, and it links back in with the whole sustainability agenda, because we need to develop ways, and Jessica's referenced them, in which we as society can, have a more sustainable agenda for our country, for our countries and for our environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you. I think this were very, very interesting presentation, and really also that showed how much we need specific provisions regarding equines in the next legislation. I must say I hope that 2023 will be a good year regarding the revision of the animal welfare legislation, and this was a good point to finish the year, to really raise the issue of equines. What we're going to do, I think, as an animal welfare intergroup, is this letter to the Ministry of the Agriculture of France in order to really raise the issue of what is going on the horse fair in France in Morse. And then also I think we could take up the other demand on a letter to the Commission regarding PMSG that came from Annika Brunner. And I think we should again focus that this should be banned, the production, the import, the export, and what are we waiting to have clearer rules on that, because it would just mean to be coherent to the existing rules that we have already there. So thank you very much for all of you, those online, those in the room, and also for your very good questions. I wish you very nice resourcing holidays and feast with your family or friends and your pets, of course. Enjoy also nature, and as I said, I wish much more animal welfare for 2023 and stronger rules that we need to implement. And thank you very much for your cooperation and to be there, and yeah, all the best. Thank you. Oh, I forgot the interpreters. Thank you also to you, of course, and all the best to you and to your families too, and also for giving me always some few minutes more. You are great. Thank you very much.